Wait for it. Wait for it. All right, there we go. Oh, the name didn't update though. Although, I mean, I guess the name's appropriate. That's originally what we were going to be talking about. Welcome everyone to a pop-up episode. I was about to go through my whole routine. So this is a quick pop-up episode where we're going to be talking about government bids and the government bidding process. And the reason that this is a hot topic for us right now is we are actually going to be live streaming a bid proposal conversation between all the members, or 4 of the members of Gunner Technology, for you guys today. But as it turns out, at the very last minute, Lisa came, I guess, e-storming in with something she had found in the bid itself, which was a requirement that I can't imagine too many people out there fulfill that requirement, but it basically eliminates us entirely. So we can get into specifics, right? There's nothing holding us back.
Well, yeah, the whole thing that I wanted to do was kind of give insight into the bid process and kind of like walk through like a real brainstorming session on how we approach government bids. And kind of, I was going to actually post, which I still can, if anyone's interested, I can still post the actual proposal document to see, so our viewers can see what it's like. But I wanted to walk through and show how we break down the requirements into actual understandable pieces of functionality, and how the bid process kind of goes through the process of you find a proposal, you decide if it's something you want to bid on, you read through the specifications, you mark anything that's not clear with questions. You submit those questions to the government agency before the Q&A period. You get only one shot at getting answers to those questions, and then you have to explicitly write out how you're going to fulfill those requirements. So I wanted to go through the process of turning their kind of technical jargon into human understandable terms, kind of like explain it like I'm 5. So we could go through it that way. So it's totally open. We can certainly post the link to the document so they can see. That's not a problem at all.
And in particular, I mean, I guess as part of that, it was going to be determining what questions we needed to ask them and stuff like that. But what we found was, and do you have the actual relevant section handy? Because
I do. Yes.
You might be able to read through it real quick for us.
1 second. It says qualifications, special standards of responsibility. This section establishes special standards of responsibility, in all caps. Unless you possess the following mandatory minimum qualifications, do not submit an offer. 3 years experience with developing mobile applications for a health and human services governmental entity, specifically for child welfare entities with both Apple and Android and Windows platforms. Must provide documentation of a successful implementation with at least 2 human services governmental entities, specifically for child welfare entities. Provide a detailed narrative statement with adequate information to establish that you meet all the requirements stated in subparagraph A above. Include all appropriate documentation. If you intend for us to consider the qualification of your key personnel, predecessor businesses, or subcontractors, explain the relationship between you and such person or entity.
So basically the relevant section, I guess, is the first section where you need, was it 3 years experience, 3 years direct experience building mobile apps for a government entity
with
that
child
deals
welfare.
With child welfare.
You have to
human services.
Basically 3 years building child welfare apps, and these apps have to be designated for Apple, Android, and Windows.
Which I think that's probably fine.
Well,
although I guess that requirement that rules out anything that you wrote to be any platform specific application. It would seem to me.
Right.
Although you could probably argue your way out of that or get some sort of exemption. But I'm not sure. The trouble with bids like these for me, and we've run into it time and time again, is the mandatory requirements seem to box out any sort of new player in the field of government contract work.
Right. Well, it's the whole thing where you have to have experience to get experience, kind of thing. We hear about that in the job world all the time. You know, you go to get a job and they say, well, you need experience. Well, I can't get
Yeah, now
experience
you
until
need
I.
like, yeah, you need 5 years experience, and it's like, well, how do I get an introductory position with 5 years experience when you need experience to get an introductory position?
Right, right. And so the interesting thing is, I mean, there's a lot of interesting things about this, but the first thing is you know, we're in year one of expanding the business into the government sector, and we've had some success, and like you said, we've had a lot of unsuccesses or not even non-successes,
Yeah,
non-starts. We've
I
had a
think
lot
I
of
call
non.
them non-starters and failures in the
Right,
actual
right.
area.
So you know, one of those ways where you're thinking, okay, well, what we'll do is since we don't have experience, we'll discount ourselves and we'll come in as low bidders. Well, we've
Yeah, this
tried
is a
that.
this is a whole different angle. I mean, and you would have thought that if we had come in and said we can basically do work at cost, that people would have been overjoyed with that idea. And I mean, if you imagine your day to day life, if someone says, you know, I'm a new business, I'm new to the area, so you know, we're running a special now where we basically are just doing work at cost, and we want to prove to you that you know we're a new entity, but we do great work. So it's a win win for both of us because I get recommendations from you, and you get amazing work at a much lower cost than anyone else can provide, just because I'm just starting off. You would think that would be a huge win for everyone involved, but it turns out that's not the case.
No, and again, it's weird because again, there's a lot of things that are weird about this. Not too long ago, and in a lot of cases, well, excuse me, one step at a time. Not too long ago, price was sort of the sole criteria for government bids. They would take the bottom price no matter what, even if it was this company that basically didn't even know how to put together a bid. If they came in with a low number, they got the bid. Then things kind of started to change, and they came up with a more of a scoring system. Now, this speaks to the federal government. States and local governments kind of they still can go based only on price, but some of them do have a scoring system. And so it went from being bottom price wins to now low bidding can actually hurt you. And it's interesting because what they're basically doing is making the old mistake of using price as a quality indicator. And so I heard this story for the first time where basically a jewelry store owner was going out of town. And so he says to the manager, hey, look, I'm going to be gone for a week. Those things in the front there, we've had those forever. They haven't sold. So just mark them down 60% to get rid of them. And the manager wasn't paying attention, so he accidentally marks them up 60%. And the jewelry store owner comes back and they're just gone. They're just sold out. Because when people don't understand something, they use indicators to define quality. And so I wouldn't know what a good gem is or a good piece of jewelry is. So I mean, I could be I could be a culprit there too, where I'm looking at, oh, that jewelry has a high price tag. It must be pretty good. And that's kind of what the government does in instances like this.
And it's tough too because it doesn't seem like there's I guess pricing is always the hardest thing. And what we've learned is that low pricing in government bids it makes yourself appear as if you don't know what you're doing.
Right, correct. And it's quite the opposite.
Yeah, I was gonna say even if the impetus behind that low pricing is basically the idea that, like I was talking about, you know, we don't have the relevant experience yet, but we have tremendous private sector experience, tremendous success, you know, across numerous domains. So we basically just need the opportunity to show that we can bring those qualities and skills to the government domain, which is why we're pricing this bid low so that you guys are more likely to take a risk on us. But as it
right.
turns out, what that translates as is we're pricing this so low because we're going to do a terrible job. So at least you guys won't be out that much money.
And you know, like you're saying, it's with us, it's just the opposite. All things equal, take out the fact that we're trying to, in some cases, compensate for a lack of experience with a lower cost. Our cost really should be lower than our competitors. It should be because the costs that go into this, is two things: labor, time, and infrastructure costs. And with our competitors are using tools that are slower to develop in, so it's going to take them longer to build it, and they're using older, more traditional infrastructure and hosting environments that don't have auto scaling capabilities. They're not serverless. So they, by definition, have to be more expensive to operate. So we should always be lower than our competition. And that actually is a signal of the opposite, that we have higher quality because we're using better tools and a better, more cutting edge infrastructure to manage our platforms.
So 2 things there. One is we're quickly learning that this is an arena that doesn't, it's not a one-to-one translation between the private and the public sector, where
Not at all.
you,
Right.
you
Right.
can you can make those price claims and they translate well, which I guess carries over to point 2, which is the difficulty in, I don't know if I want to call it making the case, but explaining why our costs are lower, explaining serverless technology and how that reduces infrastructure costs tremendously, explaining the tools that we use and how that allows us to develop stuff quicker, more efficiently, stuff like that. So maybe you can touch on a little bit the road bumps we've hit there, as far as people not really understanding what exactly we're doing, which is why, which are the reasons why our costs are lower, in addition to trying to get more direct experience with the government field.
Sure, and it's very simple. The government process is extremely impersonal. You never get face-to-face time. You may get a teleconference interview where you're answering questions, and that's kind of it. When we're talking with entrepreneurs and commercial clients, which are our other 2 client bases, it's much more of a conversation, where generally you have a very long conversation with the person or the stakeholder first, and then you put together a proposal when you're already explaining what our infrastructure is, why it's better. I can show people, I can use the old Tommy Boy reference where he's illustrating why his brake pads are better. And he goes, now let's say you use the other guy's brake pads. So I can
Right.
I can use the analogies and kind of be a very a very personal analogy to help people understand.
And you can see the
Whereas,
light bulbs going off as you're giving your descriptions. You can see people start to get it, and you can see what works, what descriptions work, how you need to approach the conversation. Whereas governments, like you said, are completely, you send a document in and you have no idea how it's going to land.
right, that's exactly right. And kind of to not shift gears, but another angle of what we're talking about, we've talked about how they use price as an indicator, and a quality indicator, but they also use experience as a quality indicator, which is an interesting thing. So on the face of it, you'd be like, experience is good, and I'm not necessarily arguing that it isn't, but the only indicator that experience is that you're just good enough, that you're just good enough to not get fired. Think about the whole thing where the guy who's been at the company for 8 years gets promoted over the guy, or gets a raise over the guy who's been there for 2 years, even though the guy that's there for 2 years may be producing more, but it's because the guy has been there longer. Well, experience is only an indicator that guy has been there. He's been good enough to not get fired for 8 years. Maybe he's better than that. Maybe he's not. But all that the fact that he's still there tells you is that he's not bad enough to get fired. So even experience is not a direct indicator of high quality.
And the difficulty there is translating private sector work to public sector bids. So
Yeah.
it's hard to. It should be easier to translate entrepreneurial and commercial success to the public sector, because in some cases that might not make sense. In some arenas of the government, that translation doesn't work, that private sector to public sector. But in the realm of software development, there is nothing different between writing an app for a startup and writing an app for a federal entity, as opposed to, except for possibly security issues and legalities that have to go into stuff like encryption and multi-factor sign-on and stuff like that.
Well, but even that is not necessarily because it's the government. It needs to be. They both share the same thing.
Yeah, I guess what I meant there is that there might be specific federal products or federally developed products that you have to use that you would only use if you were using a government contract or working on a government contract that you would
Sure.
never have experience with until you actually started working with that system.
And the other thing is that, well, there's two things I want to touch on in talking about sort of entrepreneurs and commercial level clients. It's a lot easier when you're explaining to someone, when you're talking about because the government wants you to list out ahead of time how you're going to accomplish every single thing on the list, how you're going to accomplish it.
Well, also asking for an agile development process,
right? Which is like a totally different, totally other episode. But the real honest point is, a lot of the times you don't know how you're going to fire the gun until you're in the trenches, because you just haven't been in that situation before. Because that's what we do. We write software that's never been written before. So we don't know exactly how we're going to solve every single issue because it's new nearly every single time. So
I think it would be easier to make that. You would think that would be the quality that they would most look for, is the ability to be presented with a new set of problems and overachieve.
correct.
Which is basically all that we do. So you'd think that case would be easier to make, but that's apparently not what they're looking for.
That actually got to my next point, exactly what I was talking about. So the solution to this is very easy. It'll never happen in a million years, but it's very easy. A government proposal, a government bid, excuse me, a government proposal should always ask for a prototype of the application.
Exactly
always.
Right.
Always, because it won't be a completed application, because some of these things are year-long projects, maybe even longer. But it should be a prototype, a functional prototype where you can actually see it working on a device, on a browser. You can see, so that you can kind of understand that these developers get it. They understand what you're going for. Yeah, the requirements aren't all there. It's kind of kludgy. It doesn't look great, but we get that they get what we're going for. And that would be it. But the problem is all the prime contractors that have been in the game for a while would immediately revolt because they don't really have the nimble capabilities, a lot of them, to do a prototype. They would complain about doing free work. But that's what we do for entrepreneurs and commercial clients. We're like, hey, look, let me just show you something. Give me a week to put something together where I'm going to actually show you this. It'll make a lot more sense. That's kind of the solution to it, but it'll just never happen.
It's tough. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about on this pop-up episode? Any other relevant topics to?
No. I think the solution that we're looking into now, which is another way to go, and it's kind of a roundabout way, is instead of trying to make the government our client, obviously keep trying to do that, but supplement our existing government clients with prime contractors. Prime contractors are the ones that actually fill out the bids for the government agencies, and they will subcontract work out. And that counts as government experience. If you're a subcontractor to a prime, that counts as government experience. We just need to get started networking with the guys who already have existing contracts and kind of move in and get the experience that way.
Yeah, leverage their experience, because it's like it's impossible to get it. There's no way to land a contract to get experience that requires you to have experience to land that contract. It's a complete. It just makes absolutely no sense. So we're a little bit salty. That might have come off as a salty episode, but it's not really saltiness so much as like. What I don't think they understand is that this only revs us up even more to land government contracts. Like, if we fail at something, we want to succeed twice as hard. So
yeah, exactly. And again, I mean, we've already completed a few government contracts, and we're in the process of getting more. But we don't want to lose a contract. We want to lose a contract because we're not the best proposal. We don't want to lose a contract because of price. We don't want to lose a contract because of a number next to years.
Or a complete misunderstanding of the infrastructure and how we were actually going to accomplish our goals of the proposal.
That's right.
All right. Well, this is a good pop episode. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We actually had some Periscopers watching.
Oh yeah.
So shout out to Periscopers.
We should plug. We're going to be right back on in about an hour with our guests. So we'll have that coming. Doug Jewett of the Red Notebook, one of our clients, is going to join us in about an hour, and we're going to kind of, Derry's going to lead the discussion, and I was actually the engineer on the project. Doug was the stakeholder. So we're kind of going to put together a case study based on an interview, so you can kind of see how it went from the client's perspective and the developer or engineer's perspective. And that's going to kick off.
Make sure to tune into that at 5 o'clock Eastern, right?
Yeah, 5 o'clock Eastern. That's, yep.
All right, we'll catch you guys then.